think that we could safely say, and I do this, and I say so with knocking on wood and holding thumbs, that we've seen the back of load shedding. But what about another crisis? Water shedding, according to the Minister of Water and Sanitation, Primedia. She says we do not have a water crisis, and our water and our drinking water quality is good. She did, however, add at a press conference this week that potable water availability could rapidly deteriorate as demand escalates. Now, remember in 2015, there was much fanfare over a Jacob Zuma launched program called War on Leaks. In 2019, the new president, Cyril Ramaphosa, he then doubled down on the War on Leaks campaign, promising to train 15,000 young people as plumbers and artisans to fix South Africa's leaking issue. But we've seen water supply disrupted in Joburg. We've seen water supply disrupted in eThekwini. In fact, the Constitutional Court has had to close its doors because there's no water on that premises. It is a dire situation, even though you're in the Western Cape. We've had quite substantial winter rain, dams, very, very close to full, but we can't rely on that, particularly if the rest of the country could experience a crisis. Joined now on the line by Dr. Kevin Winter, researcher at the Future Water Institute at UCT. Kevin, without sounding alarm bells, without trying to be alarmist, when people say, well, water shedding is a possibility, what is your response to that?
Yeah, good morning, Lester and listeners. It's not exactly like an electrical system that you can switch off at various times. So the idea of trying to put this planned load shedding as we've had with the energy system, you can't do that with water. So I think we shouldn't even be going down that route. It's impossible to switch off a reticulation system that is running all the time and has to run. And if you get blockages in sewage lines, for instance, because not enough water is coming down, you'll also get blockages in pumps, for instance, because they've been switched off and it takes a while to bring them back up again. You suck air into the system rather than actually allowing that water to run through for which the system is designed. So there should be no question of us even thinking about a planned load shedding as we've understood in terms of the energy system. We've got to find a different recipe, a different way of trying to build this bridge to avoid that at all costs. And of course, you know, what you've just read out just right now, the Constitutional Court not being able to function, but there are hospitals right now, for instance, that are functioning very poorly without that water that's coming to them at the moment, and their residents and industry that have really struggled in Gauteng over the last, let's say, even 18 months and more. So there is some really big challenges along the way. And I can just say one more thing, which might add some more discussion, is that here we've got a minister who perhaps made a very provocative statement early on this week of suggesting that, in fact, the problems, particularly referring to Gauteng, are self-inflicted. It's caused a media frenzy because it is a provocative statement. It's almost a sense of saying the national government, we will supply the water, we've got enough water to supply, but actually the real problem lies with municipalities. So citizens, get out there and hold your municipalities accountable, which is the inference with her statement.
Yeah, what you said, Kevin, was, and I quote here, the leaks are in turn the result of under-budgeting for infrastructure maintenance by municipalities, which is partly caused by weak municipal billing and revenue collection for water services. I believe that's passing the buck. And if I use the Trumanism with a plaque on his desk, the buck stops here. The buck stops with national government. So let's talk about national government's intervention. In 2015, a much lauded big fanfare. It was launched in Nelson Mandela Bay. The War on Leaks, training 15,000 young people to be artisans and plumbers. Cyril Ramaphosa reiterated that in 2019 when he won an election. But what has happened since then is the Special Investigating Unit in fact, investigating corruption on a war on leaks program, irregular appointments, payments to Rand Water and the Energy and Water Sector Education and Training Authority. Essentially, again, corruption and grant leads to the problems that we face and faces particularly the most vulnerable in South African society. Kevin?
Yeah, thank you. And that's kind of where I was going to. And the proof is in the pudding when you see exactly what has happened to our leakage rate. We've moved in the last 6 years from around about 37% across the country to now currently standing at 46% of our water is lost in the system through leakages or unaccountable water in some way. So, that program has made no difference whatsoever. All it's done is deteriorate it further by almost 10%. And that failure is what we can ill afford in a country that has water scarcity and water insecurity.
How do we dissuade or how do we persuade people in the Western Cape, in Cape Town? We had an incredibly wet winter. Our dams, our feeder dams, nearly full. I've already started seeing, what do you call it? Conspiratorial talk is why they're saying we're water scarce when we have full dams. We may not have full dams in the next 12 months in this unpredictable climate change affected weather patterns. We cannot bank on full dams now. We do not know what will happen in the next 12, 18, 24 months, particularly here in the Western Cape.
Sure. And I think there is the issue that when you look at the rainfall pattern over the last year, and particularly 2023, where we are sort of still riding on the back of 3 rainfall events that happened in 2023, and some rainfall events obviously throughout the course of 2024. It's these rainfall events that are saving grace at the moment. They're allowing those dams to fill up in the way that they are. And we're fortunately in a window of relatively high rainfall across the region at the moment. Although when we look at it on average across the Western Cape, by the way, we actually are literally on average and in some cases below average in certain regions, despite the fact that our dams are full. We've had these events that have actually brought about the raised volume of those dams. So it's on a knife edge. It's difficult to model this kind of thing. It's difficult to actually predict what might happen. And, are we in a cycle that is a 7 or 10 year cycle? Are we going to see the same kind of day zero scenarios we saw in 2018? Are we going to see that in 2028 or 2030, somewhere around about there? We have to prepare for that. And certainly one of the things that we've got to be looking at is to improve the leakage reduction across the country. And in the Western Cape here, things are at least a whole lot better. I think as far as I recall, at Cape Town, somewhere between 14 and 17%. I hope I'm more or less correct in saying those in terms of our leakage rate at the moment. That's not good, by the way. And again, we shouldn't be celebrating that because actually the other countries that are really on top of their water resources are getting down to about 3 to 9%, somewhere in that area. So we need to get better at it quite clearly. And we need to at least also acknowledge that when the city has a maintenance program that is trying to fix the actual system and to anticipate future plans and expansion, those should be almost celebrated as a means of trying to address these oncoming leakages.
Kevin, a lot of messages here about desalination plants. Whatever happened to the desalination plant? So much money was spent on this already. More and more people say desalination is not the answer. It's very, very difficult to construct, the capital outlay, the maintenance, the running of that. If we simply just do the small things, like actually making sure that a war on leaks program works. Where were those 15,000 young artisans and plumbers deployed to? We waste a heck of a lot of water in South Africa. If we get the basics right, we do not need expensive desalination projects.
Yeah, and I think what you're right in saying here is that we're good at initiating programs. We're unable to maintain them, manage them, and sustain them. And that's one of those programs that, as far as I can see, I can't see much of an expansion of that whole team in terms of what they've done. Desalination probably is going to save the city in the long term. And now we're talking sort of 2030, 2040 onwards. And it's the last of the arsenal, as it were, of diverse water programs that the city is trying to put together. But there's lots of other things. And just the reuse of water for me is so critical. We're not learning to do that well. We are creating dirty water that is escaping through our rivers and into our oceans. And that's where there should be a much greater attention as to how we reuse that water safely on a number of other things other than potable water and so on. And there's a large volume of water that can be contained. And that's where the program and efforts need to be put into of reuse and making sure that reuse of water is safe to be able to use. Those things are things that must follow before we go into big investment programs like particularly desalination.
Dr. Kevin Winter, really appreciate your time.